Greetings and welcome to another edition of The Pedal Shift Project. The Pedal Shift Project is a series of conversations, thoughts, and experiments around the bike touring lifestyle. From tips and tricks to ideas on how to ride your ride. Let's shrink the world by bike. Show notes and more are available at pedalshift.net/314, and you can email the show at pedalshift@pedalshift.net or text me at 202-930-1109 and check Pedal Shift out on all the socials as well. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 314th edition of the Pedal Shift Project. My name's Tim Mooney. Thanks so much for joining. On this edition, it is the takeaways for the Florida 2023 ride, and I have quite a few actually this time, and Gizmo is right here, so if you hear him whining away, because he has needs. The dog has needs, let's just put it that way, and he has no problem voicing them whatsoever. In any event, I have 10 takeaways. I don't think I've ever had 10 takeaways that came so quickly and easily, but here they go. And these are, unlike past episodes, in a particular order, because number 10 actually I think is the most important one, and the one I want to share with you all the most, because it didn't come up in the ride itself, but it came after, and I do think it's really important to talk about because I did learn something new about myself and about riding, and I think that it's something that is very likely a thing for some of you, or could be a thing for some of you down the line, and I want to make sure we get to that. So number 10 is a really important one, but first we have 1 through 9. So number 1, I really loved this ride and this route, but I want to ride the Cross Florida Trail next year, and I intend to do that. It's so easy to just say this is a plug-and-play route, and I do very little deviation, although I did make some changes this year. It's really much better for me to explore the established trails that are in Florida, because I do think, as I'll talk about later on the negative side of things, Florida roads are kind of great when they're great, but they're not when they're not, and their trails are so good, and this Cross Florida Trail is fantastic. Now, on the west side of the state, it's a little less developed. East side of the state, it's fantastic, and I really just want to do that. So Cross Florida Trail, mark it down for 2024, and hold me to it if I don't do it. Number 2. I also, at the same time, really like integrating cycling with my Disney World visits. And one of the reasons why I think I keep going back to this route is because it's like when I want to do a Disney World trip along in conjunction with a February bike tour, I do this route. And, well, I think what I'm just going to have to do is do multiple trips. When I want to do a Disney World trip, I can do this ride if I'd like, or do some other version of it. But I need to split these things up. And going down to Florida during the winter is reasonably inexpensive. And the way that I do it, I don't take a ton of days off work. So, if I do decide to do another Disney World visit in the winter next year, which is a great time to go, I should either just do it separately or at the tail end or something along those lines. I like to integrate that in together. So you're either going to get 2 rides next year, or you're going to get just a longer scenario where I end up in Disney World separately after the Cross Florida Trail. 1 and 2 are sort of part and parcel of the same thing. Number 3. Touring on a Brompton means you have to clean parts regularly and avoid touching some parts altogether. This has to do with the struggles that I had on this trip, and frankly that I've had on other trips as well, with the seat post slide on the Brompton. This is a really common issue that people have with their Bromptons, and it's because of the nature of the system. There is a quick release lock that essentially is holding up your entire weight, just like it is on any other regular saddle. The thing that's different, though, is that it is a much more integrated and important part of the entire system of the fold. So as a result, I find that they tend to drop a lot more. I have saddle issues on my Safari, not terribly infrequently. I think everybody has issues where their saddle falls over time. But I think it's more acute on the Brompton just by the way it's built. So the big thing is that you gotta keep it clean. The seat post is really, really long. If you've never seen a Brompton, I'd encourage you to take a look at one or even just Google it, and you can see how long that seat post is. It's really freaking long. It's several feet long. It might even be a meter long for you metric types. But in any event, if you get any kind of oil on it, and of course we've got oils and lubricants with the chain and stuff like that, but also just even your skin, your human skin oils gives enough lubrication to cause that to maybe not work so well. So, your instinct often is to grab the thing by the seat post from time to time. And that's a terrible idea, because what it ends up doing is you get your skin oils on it, and that alone is enough. And if you've been fiddling with the chain, that's going to become a problem. So got to keep it clean, got to keep your fingers off of the seat post as best as you can. One of the things I'm going to do as a takeaway here is I'm going to try to make sure that I keep those pre-moistened alcohol cleaning wipes that you have for like eyeglasses and screens and stuff like that. I'm going to try to make sure that I have a couple of those at minimum, if not more, for any particular tour I ever do, just because it gets dirty over time, and just mindlessly scrubbing it down with a sweaty bandana, I'm here to tell you it doesn't really work very well. All right, so clean the seat post regularly, keep your darn fingers off of it, and you're going to be much happier when you're touring on a bike like this. Number 4, I'm still not satisfied with my Brompton touring setup, but I'm also finding it's pretty good as is. And this is me fiddling around with the idea of how to store more gear on the rear rack. The biggest issue that you have when you're touring with a Brompton and you've got stuff on that rear rack is heel strike. And I've talked about this before. The biggest problem is that the integrated bungees on it tend to push the gear that you have on your rack forward towards your heels, and I struggle with that a lot. Now, of course, one of the things that you can do is not use those, and you can use a bungee that goes laterally around from side to side rather than front to front. And of course, that's certainly what I'm going to end up doing a little bit more of. But I talked about before this trip that I considered doing the backpack, and that I used a different dry bag on this trip, and that just wasn't enough capacity. I've also been revisiting the use of the second Ortley pannier as a possibility, and I've seen some really interesting things about that. So I'm not satisfied, but at the same time, I pulled out my larger dry bag, and it's nice and skinny, and the way, if you do it long ways, you don't worry about heel strike. And so at the end of the day, I'm not satisfied. I'm constantly going to be tinkering and trying to find new ways to make this thing work better. But my current setup is pretty good. I'll have to be pretty honest. Number 5, Florida is not a terrible bicycling state, except where it is. So I think that Florida is generally a pretty average state when it comes to cycling. It is dramatically above average in some of its trails. The trails are great. They tend to be paved. They tend to be well used. They tend to be well cared for. I will note for the record that on the Van Fleet Trail, there was some sign that said, Florida State Parks, the best state park system in the country, or something like that. And I was like, guys, folks, simmer down now. I find that to be a little performative. Maybe it's based on some metrics, but I was like, that's advertising puffery there. That said, they're pretty good. Those trails are pretty good. I don't know about the rest of the state park system, but they were really, really proud of themselves. Where Florida fails is the infrastructured up roads. And of course, I end up riding quite a few of them out there. I will say that the back roads I have had extremely good success with. Our old friend Dean Still Road, which many of you may think its actual name is Our Old Friend Dean Still Road. I have such great experiences riding on there, and that would be the place where I would expect to have the worst in some ways. There's no shoulder. It's backcountry. You hear horror stories of, folks in pickup trucks and all this and that. But I will tell you, not only just pickup trucks, but even larger trucks, transportation trucks, haulers, they go way out of their way to go around me, and they're very safe. And although the speeds are relatively high, the speed limit is high, folks slow down around me there. So I've had some really good experience there. Where do I not? closer into Orlando. I think people drive like maniacs around there, to be honest. The approach into the back door of Disney World, that northern entrance, it was a lot of folks who are probably not used to seeing bikes on that road, even though I see through heat maps that there are a lot of cyclists on those roads. And folks were just not great. So I think that it's going to be a your mileage may vary situation. I wish there was more infrastructure. A lot of the infrastructure in the places that I've cycled in Florida tends to be sidewalks. Sidewalks are an incomplete bit of infrastructure for a cyclist, because I think that vehicles, when you're crossing areas where vehicles are, like especially on those stroads where you're going by big box stores and stuff, they are not looking for bicycles. They're looking for pedestrians at best, and probably not there. So a sidewalk to me is not a great bit of infrastructure, but that's what you get in Florida. The interesting thing is there are not a lot of pedestrians in Florida, I have found. Even during these beautiful stretches of weather in February, just not a lot of folks are walking about. It's very car-centric. So in a sense, the infrastructure ends up being yours, except in really busy areas around cities and whatnot, where that's a multi-use trail and multi-use pathway and whatnot. So Florida, it's not bad. It's not terrible, except where it is. Your mileage may vary. Your comfort level may vary. I have found peace in what I've done with Florida, unlike Gizmo, who is clearly not having peace right now. Number 6. When faced with headwinds, lower your expectations and go with, against the flow. I found the day one riding to be amongst some of the worst consistent headwinds that I've ever dealt with. And it wasn't the worst conditions in terms of, there wasn't the worst headwinds I've ever had, but I've never ridden where the entire ride from the jump had essentially headwinds of really sustained intensity as that first day. So what's the best way to deal with all of that? Well, the first thing is you can't do anything about it. So you may as well not complain about it. I feel like that headwinds and hills, if you go back into the history of the podcast, I think that I was a little bit more of a complainer back in the day. Now I'm sort of in the place where I am much more I find acceptance when it comes to headwinds and hills than I used to. And I think that's probably the best way to approach it. What you really want to do is not assume that you can fight it. You are not going to win against Mother Nature. The winds are undefeated, just like waves and hurricanes are undefeated, you know? And so when it comes to cycling against a headwind, you should just lower your expectation. I knew that my speed was much lower, so I changed the expectations of when I thought I was going to be rolling in. I also changed my expectations in terms of what my energy was going to be like, how I was going to feel by certain points. And I think that when you do that, when you realize, okay, conditions are different than what I expected, you're going to have a much better time with things and just kind of say, all right, I'm going to dial down the gearing and I'm going to spin into it a little bit more. I'm not going to try to fight it. I'm not going to try to make time. And if you do all of that, I think you're just going to enjoy yourself a lot more. I know I did. And I will say that the best thing that I did, and I talked about this, of course, on that first part, was getting to the point where it was like, all right. And I almost biked past this Dairy Queen. I really did in Plant City. And I was like, you know what? No. Stop trying to be a hero here. Stop trying to get to Lakeland as early as you possibly can. You'll be much happier, much more comfortable if you take a break and have a Coke float. But they didn't have Coke, and then they didn't make Coke floats. So I had to get a Diet Coke, and I had to get ice cream separately and just have it all together. So I had a Coke float or a Diet Coke float, even though they didn't make one. I know. I don't know why I'm salty about this, but that's how it was. And it was great. And I felt like $1,000,000 after that. And did I still have those headwinds? Sure. But by the time I stopped next by that lake, I felt fantastic. I was moving great. And then that really put a nice capstone to the end of the day, because I didn't get into my hotel exhausted. Well, I was pretty tired, but I mean, I wasn't like exhausted and hurting and whatever. And I'm getting there maybe 20 minutes earlier than I would have been had I not taken the break. So go with, or in this case against the flow, as much as you can when you're confronted with headwinds. You can't win. Wind is undefeated. Number 7, bring all the tools you need, yes, even that $1 crescent wrench. I don't know why I have done this, I think 2 tours in a row, but as you recall, I had the problem with the sliding seat. Now, I think it was more of a problem because, as I said before, in point number 1, 2, whatever it was, number 3, that it was dirty. The seat post was dirty or it had oils on it. But what I wanted to do was I wanted to try to tighten that clamp down. The only way I can tighten that clamp down, it's not feasible with my Brompton toolkit, which is that nice cool one that fits within the Brompton itself. I need a $1 crescent wrench, and I didn't bring it. I brought every other tool under the sun. I had spoke tensioner. I had a spoke tension wrench. I had all sorts of things. I had patches and I had, wire cutters, lots of really useless tools with me because I brought my big tool bag. And my big tool bag, for a reason I am unsure of, doesn't have that crescent wrench in it. And I need to make sure I go through my tools before we get going again next time. So make sure you bring all the tools you need. By the way, and the other side of that is don't bring the tools you don't need. You don't need every single tool necessarily for every single trip. And I was bringing too many tools that were for other types of tours, not this one. And that's kind of silly. So make sure you go through your tool stuff as well. Bring the tools you need. Yes, even that $1 crescent wrench. Number 8. I prefer clothing coverage over sunscreen when I can. What does that mean? Sunscreen is really, really important because sunscreen is going to stop you from sunburning. And I did a really good job this trip, as opposed to past trips, of keeping myself covered up with sunscreen. What I found was that I don't like sunscreen. I don't know too many people that love sunscreen, especially when you're cycling, especially when you're active. And sure, they have the stuff that's supposed to be sweat proof. And does it work? Yeah, kind of a little bit, but it just still feels a little gross on you. I found myself wearing my jacket, my rain jacket, for most of the time. I think actually exclusively rode in it. And it started off because things were a little bit cool, and that's fine. But later I found I was still pretty comfortable with the pit zip down, but I was keeping the sun off of my arms by keeping that jacket on. And then, of course, the jacket also comes up on my neck a little bit. I was able to put just sunscreen on my legs and just basically on my face and nose and all the other kind of places around that. That is much better for me. Now, if it were hotter, I don't think it would have been because I would have gotten clammy inside that rain jacket and whatever. But what I have determined is I like it when I wear clothing to cover me up. First of all, almost anything you wear is going to have a much higher SPF than any kind of sunscreen that you have. So that's good. It's more effective. That's great. But it also just, for me, typically feels better. So that's what I'm going to be focusing in on, is trying to wear more clothing coverage. You can also do that with sun sleeves I've talked about before, but you can do the same sun sleeve material you can use as a neck gaiter and keep the sun off of your neck. I've done that before. So I think that it's finding that combination of what works best and what's comfortable. I don't mind it so much on my legs, but in other tours I have, and in fact in Florida before, I've worn pants or long pants while I've cycled. I've never done any cycling tights, but that's something I may consider in the future if it's, a good way to keep sun off of me. I really think that clothing, I'm finding, is better for me than sunscreen, except where I can't put clothing, like, say, on my face. Although you can certainly do the same thing. There are sun sleeve material things for your face. Folks who go out fishing a lot in very sunny areas, they'll be head to toe in that kind of stuff. I've seen folks who work outside in landscaping and that kind of stuff, especially down in Florida. Keep the sun off your skin. It's a bad thing. I'm so glad that we've learned this sometime in my lifetime, because I certainly was outside in the sun way too much when I was a kid. Sun on you is good in small doses, not in the doses that we get when we ride for long, long periods of time on the bike. Sunscreen, cover up, it's important. Number 9, you don't need to carry thousands of calories of food with you when you're within a few miles of civilization. For too long, I have brought, I think, variety, lots of different types of things with me on the bike. And I think I've probably said it in other takeaways that it's sort of like when you have snacks with you, you get to a point where you're like, I never want to see that again. I don't want to eat that. That was kind of the case with my sandwich on this trip, but I forced myself to say, no, you're going to eat that. That is what you're going to eat. That's what you bought. And I did have some other things that I took along with me, but what I specifically didn't do was buy a giant bag of chips and multiple candy bars and all sorts of other things for like different types of calories, because I found that I would eat all of it when it's available. And I don't need that many calories when I ride. You need easily accessible calories when you ride. You do need the simple carbohydrates and things like that. Now, for those of you who are fat burning keto types, awesome. I wish I could be like you. I have tried, but I can never make it work full time for me. So when I ride, I do need those simple carbs. And it works great. And there are lots of different ways to kind of approach it. You can do it with all sorts of different things, but I don't need to carry so many damn calories with me. And I found that to be much more liberating on this trip. I didn't eat as much. I didn't need to, and I still felt fine. Now, granted, did I get my ice cream? Did I get my stuff? Yeah, I still ate my crap, but I didn't carry so much with me. And I think that was really the right way to go. And I think that's how I'm going to try to do it from now on when I'm doing these types of rides. Now, when I'm in the bush, when I'm on the C&O, when I'm elsewhere where I'm going to be having to pack food for multiple days, things are different then. You do want to carry plenty of food with you. If you're a bike packer, you, of course, are going to be carrying much more food with you. But for this type of a ride, which is effectively a credit card ride, no more than 10 miles away, maybe 15 from some place where I could buy food, it's silly to carry thousands of calories of food with you when you do that, at least for me. All right, here it is. I think the most important takeaway of this entire trip, and it's something that I've noticed, and it's something that I don't believe I've really talked about. This is number 10. I finally have a name for what happens to me during bike tours and following bike tours. I've talked about this a lot. I retain a ton of water in my system for sometimes days. I gain a ton of weight. I look really puffy in the photos. I don't take a lot of pictures of myself when I do these tours because I think I look gross. I really do. I look way, 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 way more puffy than I really ever am. And I finally have a name for it because I finally looked it up. It is called edema. And it is the body holding on to water because of the stress that the body is undergoing during these rides. However, it's more complicated than that. I thought, because I had misread some stuff before, that I had a problem because I was having too much salt, because edema can be caused if you're out of shape and you eat too many salty foods. However, in the context of a bike tour, it is more likely that you are drinking more water than the balance of the salts in your body. So I have a link in the show notes. Please feel free to check out. And of course, it's just one data point, but I think it really struck home for me. I was not getting enough electrolytes, especially sodium, on this ride. After the ride, when I came back, and this is days later. Now, granted, I walked 24,000 steps the first day at Disney World, and I think 15,000 steps the next day. So it's not like I went straight to the couch after. I was still doing very physical work afterwards. When I came back here, I joked with Kimberly that I had Popeye legs because my legs were really swollen, especially below the knee down to where my socks were. And my ankles were normal, but I was like Popeye. My legs were really swollen, like 1.5 times, really noticeable. And it was uncomfortable too. And I was noticing it in my arms as well. It's called edema. It can be dangerous. It probably wasn't in this instance. But if you have dealt with this ever, if you notice that you inexplicably are puffy, you feel like you're retaining water, things along those lines, it is normal for a lot of people following a really, really aggressive bike ride, including bicycle tours. What's one of the potential solutions? Well, first of all, I ain't a doctor, you know that. Talk to your doctor if this really happens a lot, and I'm going to intend to do that myself. But I talked years ago about how I went to a naturopathic doctor and she recommended a particular type of electrolyte that I've been taking. And I didn't take them on this trip. The link in the show notes notes that Gatorades and things like that, the athletic drinks, don't contain enough sodium to offset this typically. And so I didn't take my electrolyte pills on this trip because I felt fine. And I was using like Gatorades and things like that. And it wasn't as hot. I wasn't sweating as much. Turns out I was overhydrating and under electrolyting, now that electrolyting is a verb. And that ended up creating the edema that I ended up suffering through for the next several days. Was it painful? No. Was it uncomfortable? A little bit. Was it weird? More weird than anything else. And it was something that I intend to pay more attention to on future tours. So, takeaway number 10, know what is happening to your body when you're going through it. That's why it's really important that while we hydrate, that we're also really paying attention to other things that we're putting into our systems. And electrolytes is a really important thing. It turns out your body chemistry is critically aligned with the balance between the water in your cells and the sodium and potassium in your cells. Those are what are typically electrolytes. And your nervous system, everything runs on that. When it's really serious, it can create heart problems. So pay attention to this. Don't mess around with this stuff. Make sure if you do, especially if you've got cardiac issues or anything along those lines, you absolutely should be talking to your doctor about this kind of stuff. But if you notice these things happening, it's important to know what it is and to know how to be able to handle it going forward. I am really going to do some more research on this thing. I would encourage everybody else to do the same. Everybody's body is different. This didn't happen to me when I was in my 20s. It is happening to me now in my insert name of age here. So, it's just you got to listen to your body, and you got to make sure that you're giving your body what it needs in the right amounts and in the right balance. And that is, I think, the biggest takeaway that I have on this Florida ride, and it is going to inform rides all the way in the future. I hope that this is something that if you are noticing it yourself, I hope it's a little bit helpful. Look more into it yourself. And I am really, really grateful that I found out about this. I finally figured something out. How many years have I been doing this? How many years have I been doing a darn podcast? And the word edema has never come out of my lips. Well, now I know what it is. All right. So with that most important one, number 10, those are the 10 takeaways for the Florida 2023 tour. I am so glad that I got to bring you along for it. I wish that the day one audio were slightly better in parts, but we suffered through it and the day two was much better and I learned a lesson, and we won't have bad audio again, I hope, on any particular new tour. Programming notes. We have got next week the brand new, for many of you, best of. Brand new best of. What's that mean? For March and then again for April, it's going to be the continuation of Pedal Shift Tour Journals Volume 4. This month's best of is the actual tour itself. Next month will be the takeaways episode podcast. I believe that was Pedal Shift 029, if you can believe it. But I've been going through the audio on that. There was one that was just absolute garbage, so I'm actually fixing it as best I can. But it was fun. It was the mostly transit-aided bike tour from DC to Boston. It is fun. It is interesting. It's one of the things that is part of a goal that I have for 2023, as we talked about, about a month or so ago on the pod. That's going to be coming at you next week as I am sitting here recording this. The week after that, we have a brand new preview for my next tour. And then the week after that, we're going to be going right into the tour journals. So I will not reveal the new tour, but many of you may figure out what that may be. It will definitely be checking a box. It will be achieving some goals, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So we got some really fun things coming at you over the next several weeks and several months, well into the spring. And then I've even got another tour lined up after that one. So lots of fun stuff to come here on the show. And as always, we like to close out the show with a special shout out to the Pedal Shift Society. Because of support from listeners like you, Pedal Shift is a weekly bicycle touring podcast with a global community, expanding into live shows and covering new tours. If you like what you hear, you can support the show for $5, $2, or even $1 a month. And there's one-shot and annual options. If you're not into the small monthly thing, check it all out at pedalshift.net/society. On to the society. Kimberly Wilson, Caleb Jenkinson, Cameron Lean, Andrew McGregor, Michael Hart, Keith Nagel, Brock Dittus, Thomas Skadow, Marco Lowe, Terrence Manson, Harry Telgadis, Chris Barron, Mark Van Ram, Brad Hipwell, Mr. T, Nathan Poulton, Stephen Dickerson, Vince LaGreco, Cody Florchinger, Tom Beninati, Greg Braithwaite, Sandy Pizzio, Jeff Muster, Seth Pollock, Joseph Quinn, Drew Porter, Byron Patterson, Joaquin Robber, Ray Jackson, Jeff Fry, Kenny Mikey, Lisa Hart, John Denkler, Steve Henkel, Miguel Quinones, Alejandro Aviles Reyes, Keith Spangler, Greg Towner, Jody Zeranin, Lucas Barwick, Michael Baker, Brian Bechtal, Reinhard Biggle, Greg Middlemiss, Connie Moore, William Gothman, Brian Benton, Joan Churchill, Mike Bender, Rick Weinberg, Billy Crafton, Gary Matushak, Greg Latoile Lopez, James Sloan, Jonathan Dillard, John Funk, Ronald Paroli, Dave Roll, Brian Hafner, Misha LeBlanc, Ari Messenger, David Kropke, Todd Grossbeck, Wally Estrella, Sue Reinert, John Lico, Stephen Granada, Philip Mueller, Robert Lackey, Dominic Carroll, Jackie McCullough, John Hickman, Carl Presseau, David Neves, Patty Louise, Terry Fitzgerald, Peter Steinmetz, Timothy Fitzpatrick, Michael Azuski, Hank O'Donnell, David Zanoni, David Weil, Matthew Sponseller, Chad Reno, Spartan Dale, Carolyn Ferguson, Peggy Littlefield, Lauren Allensmith, Eric Burns, Thomas Pearl, Darren McKibben, Richard Stewart, Dave Fletcher, Jack Smith, Luke Parkinson, Ryan Patterson, Cyrus Faravar, John Gardner, and Sam Scruggs. And thanks also to all past and anonymous folks for helping make this show happen. Thank you for joining. You can find Pedal Shift at pedalshift.net for more great bicycle touring content. You can hear the Pedal Shift project through Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. Opening music courtesy of Jason Kent off his self-titled album. The track is called America. Check out his band Sunfield's latest release, Mono Mono, wherever cool music is available.